Good morning, Susie. Delighted to see you. Good morning, everyone joining us today on this rainy afternoon in New York. But we know that you're all coming from different places. And in the chat, do tell us where you are calling from as we're getting started. So a little bit of the logistics to get us on the road. We are going to take some questions at the end. So for your Q&A to Susie that I will monitor, please make sure that you post them in the Q&A section down on your screens. For all other exchanges, you're welcome to use the chat. But we are going to get started because we have a very exciting and meaningful conversation to share with you today. My guest is Dr. Suzy Welch. Congratulations, Suzy, on your recent PhD, another step in your becoming.
Yeah.
Excited to hear more about it. Dr. Suzy Welch is a colleague at NYU, professor at Stern Business School, and founder and director of NYU Initiative for Purpose and Flourishing. In addition to all of her other amazing accomplishments, she's an author of, and I'm holding the volume right in front of you, Becoming You, the Proven Method for Crafting Your Authentic Life and Career. And that is the topic of our conversation today. Many of you know Suzy as a leading voice in business and leadership. She was the editor of Harvard Business Review, co-author of Winning, and a frequent contributor on NBC's Today Show. So this is just among many other accomplishments this remarkable colleague of mine. Her newest book, Becoming You, is something very different, however. It's not your straightforward management book. It's really sharing of a journey, honest, vulnerable, and wise, through what happens when life takes us asks us to start over again. Suzy, welcome to our community. I'm so thrilled to have you with us today.
Well, I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you for having me. Great honor.
Fantastic. So let's begin at the beginning, not at the start of your career, because that will take us several webinars, but
Yeah.
of this particular story that brought us together this afternoon. Was there a trigger moment, an experience that made you realize you needed to write this book? Was there something of your story of becoming that you felt might help others?
Yes, there I can actually pinpoint the exact moment. So I was teaching Becoming You at NYU, and we had begun to teach it outside of NYU because I had gone to the dean and said we have to democratize this methodology. It's helping a lot of people, and there's demand for it. And can we bring it outside of the walls of NYU? And he said yes, which was wonderful. And so we started teaching in the immersives. And around that time, my old publisher for my previous books was coming around a lot saying, hey, will you write this Becoming You book? We're hearing a lot about it. And other publishers were approaching me as well. And I know how hard it is to write a book, as probably many of the people on this call have experienced this. Nobody finishes a book and says, wow, that was easier than I thought. I mean, writing a book is soul draining and logistically hard and all those things. And I was walking in the woods with my daughter, Eve, who's 30. She's an artist, and she's very much a free spirit, as artists often are. And she's always got my back. She's just a beautiful person. She's the youngest of my four. And I was bitching and moaning, if you will, about how people wanted me to write the book. And I said, I would name my publisher, who she knows well. And I said, Hollis is saying I've got to write this book, and my students are asking me to write the book so that they can give it to their friends and their parents, and I don't want to write this book. And much to my utter shock, Eve grabbed me by the arms and she said, you have to write the book. You have to write the book, Mom, because it's helping a lot of people, and you're just keeping it to this small group of people who can get to you or can find you at NYU, and it's not fair. And she had sort of, she many times seen me do the methodology with her friends and with people around her and her age. And she was like, you can't hold these ideas in. It's not right. And I was like, oh no, if Eve is coming for me, I'm done for, because she's typically like follow your bliss kind of thing. And I honestly, I dropped my head and I said, okay, because she was not wrong, and she is one of those very wise young people. So that was the moment. And then I literally went back to the house and I called my publisher and I said, okay, I'm done resisting you. What's the deadline? And we went from there.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, really interesting how the book sort of pulled you rather than
Yeah.
pushed the book, right? And it's really resonating. As I mentioned to you privately, I have a neighbor who is an alumna of Stern, and she's been to your talks, etc. And when the book finally came out, she came back and said, "Finally, we've got the book from Suzy." So, the title itself, Becoming You, I'm wondering how you arrived at that title, suggests to me that you see identity, you see that true self as not fixed.
I
There
mean, it's all about the ing.
exactly.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about this becoming process and a little bit of your own, journey.
That's a very big question. Let me start with the ing part of it and the becoming part. Um, I have always thought that we are a series of commas and that we are a long process of becoming. I once passed a gravestone and it said, the inscription on it was construction completed. And I thought it was kind of touching because that's when we're done, right? When we're done. Um, but one thing that's universal about our process of becoming is that people are always exhorting us to follow our purpose. People are saying, you've got to live your purpose. That's when they're not saying follow your passion, which I'm not going to discuss because it makes my head blow off my body. But people are always told follow your purpose. But no one ever says how, as if we can just pluck our purpose out of the sky and then follow it. And I think that this is actually almost undermining of people and dangerous because very few people know their actual purpose. There's a lot of noise that gets between us and our purpose. And there's no, in my experience, there were limited methodologies for helping people pinpoint their purpose and the pathway to it. Obviously, there's people who have written about this before, but I had my own methodology that I had been developing for a decade and a half. And so I wanted to be the bridge between people being told to live their purpose, which is very good advice, and the actual living of it, which was the how do you figure out what it is. And so I went to NYU and I said, I think I've got a methodology that will help you, that I wish I had taken when I was in business school, which is to help you identify your purpose I'm a very unwoo-woo person. I'm very scientific and research based, and I just wanted to get this methodology out there. And very soon after it got out there and I started teaching it to hundreds of people, we began to see its efficacy, which we've now tested and feel very, very proud of. So it's not like once you find out your purpose, though, that you're done. You have to then live into it. And for everybody, that's a different story because some people can go right into it. They can completely stop and then change direction. Or for some people, it's tweaking. But it's not as if that doesn't morph because, and then I'll stop talking so you can ask a good question. But the Becoming You methodology excavates 3 data sets, and those data sets are your values, your aptitudes, and your economically viable interests. And your values generally don't change after age 25 unless you've had a seismic event. But the facts are plenty of people have seismic events. Your aptitudes are generally fixed from age 15. So we just test to find out what those are. And then your economically viable interests can really change because just think about how AI has changed economically viable interests. And so there are 3 data sets. And this is why I like the Becoming You methodology best as a lifelong tool, that you go back to it again and again and revisit the data points again and again, and it kind of morphs along with you. It's not a one and done. And I'm now have been teaching it long enough that I see my students revisit the tool and tweak where they have to tweak to change the destination.
Yeah, that's and I hope that we will dig a little bit further into how you arrived at that methodology and what story it is telling you now, because I know you have multiple data points right now, and I know you are looking globalizing this methodology around the world and looking at cultural differences,
Yeah.
which will be absolutely fascinating. But before we get there, I still want to stay with you a little bit as a protagonist of ours.
Okay. Okay.
Hey, you lived many lives from I've followed you for many years.
Yeah.
Journalist, business thinker, author, public intellectual, which you, as you've been kind of taking inventory of your life, writing a book and revisiting some of your transitions, surprised you most in, in how you again reevaluated your pivots in life?
Like many people, for the vast majority of my life, I was the editor of my life and not the author of my life. And that's true of almost all of us. I remember when my kids were young, at one point just blurting out, there are a lot of stakeholders in Suzy Inc. And I think many of us feel that way. I mean, I had my parents, I had my children, I had my boss. I've always worked, my multitude of bosses, and I did my best to be a good editor of my life, but I was not truly the author. And I always say that the main reason we end up doing that is love. And so there's no crime in love, like the love of your children or the love of the spouse or different needs, like need for financial security, to be editing your life. But the problem is we never I shouldn't say never, but it's very hard to have the courage and the discipline to put that pen in your hand and say, I'm going to be the author at any point. And that's the work that Becoming You asks you to do. So I would say I was the editor for a very long time, actually longer than I should have been. Longer than I should have been. There was just a moment where I couldn't even conceptualize that I could be the author of my own life. But then I was forced to be. Um, I was forced to be because my husband died. And I honestly had a great deal of trouble visualizing life without him. He was a very forceful person. And we definitely lived his dream of a life. And I was a very willing participant in that because I loved him very much. And he used to say, "That's the deal, Suzy." And it was the deal. Like when we were married, I was offered a very important, high profile job in TV, and I wanted it very much. But I would have been working, 6 days a week. And I came home and I said, "Look, I've gotten this offer." And he said, "That's not the deal, Suzy." And I understood it was not the deal. But had I been the author of my life, it would have been, but I chose not to be. But then a moment came where I was alone, and my kids were completely grown. I'm a grandmother. They're gone. They're launched, and the pandemic had closed down the company I was working at. I had become an entrepreneur with my family, and the pandemic ended that company. We sold it. Thank God we were able to sell it, and I could be anything in a way. I had no idea who I was or what I should do. And so I was the absolute very first beta tester of Becoming You. I mean, I think the story is kind of amazing because I was up there in the woods walking my dogs, and I literally went to the woods after Jack died. It was in the middle of the pandemic, and I was like, what am I to become without him? I could go back to TV, and they wanted, I mean, not to be, they wanted me to go back to TV. I was invited to come back onto TV. I could have started maybe my own communications company. And I felt like none of these things, I almost didn't even know how to make a decision. I
Mhm.
didn't know how to make a decision, but I had this methodology, and the first person I applied it to was me. And that is how I ended up in the office of the dean at Stern saying, "I think I have this idea." But I knew as soon as I got into the classroom and I started teaching it and seeing what it did, that it was an absolute match with my values, my aptitudes, and my interests. And I was levitating. And I'll tell you, after the first semester, when the class ended up being quite successful and they asked me to join the faculty first time, I sat not at this desk, it was a different desk, but literally sat like they thought something was wrong with me, but I was sobbing. I was sobbing, which is not an unusual reaction I've come to discover when somebody finally lands at their purpose.
Yeah.
I was overcome. So that's the story.
Just absolutely amazing. And thank you for sharing it with us at such a personal level. I also found there's a powerful theme in your book about letting go of labels, of roles, even of certainty. What was the hardest part of unbecoming? Like you mentioned, the editor and the author.
Yeah. Well,
So
so
letting
many.
go of the editor what.
Yeah. Just imagining what I could be. I mean, I think it was, look, I had to even come to terms with the fact that I could be the author of my life. It's like I had agency. Like, even just thinking I can put the pen in my own hand and write the story that I was meant to write. That was the first stunning realization. I think that we just let it's very easy to let life tell us that's not possible, and then we buy into that narrative. And but I also realized in that period that you can't just pluck your purpose out of the air. It has to be based in reality. And for me, it's like, okay, I knew what my values were, but I also had to play with the truth of what my aptitudes were. I had certain skills and I wanted to lean into those skills and aptitudes. I was good at certain things and I wanted to be doing what I was good at. Um, and then it ended up um, that what I was teaching was the perfect economically viable opportunity because my timing, as my students would say, your timing was immaculate. I mean, I was talking to the world, so to speak, about what to do with your life coming out of the pandemic. And, I was lifted by this ravenous hunger for people to understand people came out of the pandemic saying, okay, that's it. There's the message, not going to postpone joy because who knows what's going to go on in this world. And there were also sort of geopolitical and economic things happening at the same time. And there was this kind of great reset. And I was speaking right into that reset and it all converged. Look, the first curriculum of Becoming You 4+ years ago has been changed and elevated and I mean, just before this call, I was working on one of our tools. We've created a lot of digital tools to scale this so that people around the world can take it as they are now doing and go through the methodology. If you had, my first time I taught Becoming You, there weren't even slides. Okay. Now we have a suite of digital tools. And one of the things I discovered about myself quite late in life is when my husband went into hospice, I left work and which was a decision that any person would make, and I would make 1,000 times over. And while he was in hospice, my son and his grandson started a music tech company together, and it took off like a shot. Like we were like, what? We thought they were two very nice little boys. They were best friends, and they started this company together. And it like with one day they came home and said, we just hired our 55th employee, and we were like, uh-oh, because you boys don't really know how to tie your shoes. And so they had a very good idea. And Jack said to me, look, Suzy, why don't you go into the office of this startup a few hours a day. The nurses are here, and it will do you good to get out of the house a few hours a day. And at age 58, I discovered the world of entrepreneurship and that I had gifts and talents as an entrepreneur that were unknown to me and others. And so I didn't want to leave those behind when I created the new me. And I was able to bring it all together. Okay, I was age 60 when it happened for me, but I feel like, had I known what I know now, I could have done it so much sooner.
Absolutely amazing. Many people today feel like they're in between spaces. It's easier for us to read in a book, etc. Once you know your purpose and you have a direction. So, but if you're in between career transitions, lots of uncertainty, AI disruptions, what would you say to someone who is in that in between space right now?
Okay. So let's talk about what you do when you're in that in-between space. And so many people are in it. What we do in that in-between space is we become frantic and we become scared and we become paralyzed and we start searching the world around us for like where are the holes that I can plug myself into. But what I would suggest is a totally different approach to that in-between space, which is you find out who you are, that you paint a self-portrait of yourself standing still because you're going to be running again soon. Why not figure out which way to go? Because as you know, the old great saying goes, if you don't know where you're going, just about any road will do. And then you end up on the wrong road. And so I use my students' time in the MBA program to say, this is the last chance you're going to have for about 40 years. Let's figure out who you are. And I mean, not what you would write down. Who are you? And you would write some words down. No, 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 1,000 times no. That is not the way to find out who you are. The way to find out who you are is with, for instance, with personality. I love it when people say they describe their personalities as if we can self-report our personalities. I wish. I wish I was all the things I said I was. I need to know how the world experiences me. So you need to do the testing to find out what your values are when you separate that from what you think they should be. I first originally, when I started teaching Becoming You, I let people self-report their values until very quickly I realized that everybody just manipulated their values for their comfort level. And I thought, okay, I have to separate people from their identity issues and what their society and their culture tells them their values should be. That's why I developed the Values Bridge, which is a test that really people come out and they say when they look at the results, typically they go like this. It's true. Because what's happened is somebody has called them on what their true values are. But like if I ask my students, what are your values? Or ask anybody, they'd say family first. Everybody always says family first. And then they say financial security. But there are 16 values. And I know from all of our data, more than 80,000 people have taken the test now, that family centrism is a top 5 value for only 50% of the population. So everybody says it is, but it's not. And you have to be clear with yourself what your values are. Then aptitudes, almost no one knows what their true aptitudes are. They think they're skills, they think they're expertise. They're not. Those can be tested on 4. We test them on 4 different dimensions. And then when it comes to interests, people have a very small aperture. We've all been on conveyor belts from when we were in college. And we think, okay, there's sort of there's education, there's consulting, and there's tech, or there's banking, and there's and there's consulting. But the fact are, there's 135 industries and 12 megatrends and 1,100 different kinds of jobs. And for me, when I teach Becoming You in all of its different forms, it's like prying open the aperture on what's out there that you're just not even looking at. And one of the great joys is when one of my students goes, "Oh, I didn't realize that I could do HR in shipbuilding." I have a student who found that out, like suddenly thought, "Oh, shipbuilding's an industry." And it's like, yes, and they're waiting for you. Okay. And she left what she was going to be doing. She was going to go into enterprise consulting. And her first job was in Mobile, Alabama. And now she's just been transferred to Athens. And she's like my happiest graduate. But she had to be kind of shaken awake to say, look at what else is out there. So if you're in an in-between time, this is your time to get a sense of data that you really need to get a lock in. Then you can face the world. Then you can figure out where you fit in. Only then.
Yeah, for those of us who are not lucky enough to take your class, Suzy, and I will be kind of in between question and guidance here. I know you have assessments that are offered on your website. Could you
Yes.
just tell us a little bit on kind of self-help journey,
Yeah.
how to get to those assessments and how to use them?
Yes, absolutely. Look, you can find out your values in 22 minutes. The valuesbridge.com, you can take it. There's a free version. I recommend it's $30 to take the full version because it really tells you all of your 16 values. But I understand that's not available to everybody. But you're done. I mean, it's one and done. You can figure out your values that way. So and you can find it at thevaluesbridge.com. And if you want to learn more about it, go to becomingyou.com and read all about the work that went into it. It's a very research-based, psychometrically tested. I'm very proud of that tool.
Yeah.
And
We're
then,
going to send it along. We're going to send a link along with the notes from this webinar.
great. For your aptitudes, I recommend using UScience. Again, I have no skin in that game. That's a separate company. I do work closely with them because I so believe in their tool. At uscience.com, it gives you a very comprehensive report on your cognitive aptitudes. We have a test that if you give me a month, will be completely done called Career Traits Compass, and we'll have it on our website. And it tells you where you fall on the continuum from individual contributor to leader. And then for personality typing, I happen to love the Enneagram, but I don't believe you should ever take it unfacilitated because the amount of times that it's inaccurately typed is about 40 to 60%. But if you can find a good practitioner, I would highly recommend learning what your Enneagram type is. And then to really find out about your personality and your aptitudes, you have to ask other people. You cannot self-report. And for this reason, we created PIE360. It's like, I always say this and it upsets some people, but it's like a home pregnancy test for 360 feedback. We give you the power to give yourself 360 feedback. You can send it up to 40 people and it costs, I believe it's like $11. And it just tells you how the world receives you in terms of your relationships with people, how the world receives you in terms of the quality and frequency of your ideas, and how the world experiences you in terms of your reliability around execution. People, ideas, and execution. And this has been a very popular tool because you get a very clear report card on how the world is experiencing you. But you also get this other magical thing, which it tells you your self-awareness score because you rate yourself and then you find out how the world rates you. And you may be very pleasantly surprised that you've been beating yourself up for no reason. And other times you find out that the world does not quite see you the way you do. And then for economically viable interests in the book, and I think we actually have it now on the website completely for free, is a list of resources that I personally use to stay up to date on all the industries and all the megatrends. I'm a fanatic about megatrends, and I believe we have that resource on becomingyouLabs.com.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Speaking about new trends, Susie, as you know, I spend a lot of my life thinking about worrying about AI
Yeah.
technology and its impact of how it's redefining the work we do.
Yeah.
And in this process of rebecoming,
Yes.
in the age of AI, do you think technology changes how we find or lose ourselves? And what's the becoming for us?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I had my eyes really opened the other day because a large teaching hospital reached out to me and they said, we'd like to use your tools with people who have brain injury and neurological disease because these people have their identities slipping away from them. Can we please do a clinical trial of using your tools with people who have lost what their identity is? And I thought, yeah, that's exactly what these tools do. They bring you face to face. The same day, I got an email from somebody who was on he described himself as having Asperger's. And he said, I used your tools and I could finally find words to describe my identity to my girlfriend. And thank you for doing that. And then after I got those two in a row, I sat at my desk and I thought, who in this world is not struggling to remember who they are with the entrance of machines into doing something that what used to be that only human beings could do, which was think. And now that machines can do our thinking for us, how do we hold on to who we actually are? And so I think that we can't forget that. And maybe more and more we have to fight to remember it and articulate it. So I think that it's going to it affects work in so many different ways. I mean, the upside of it, I would just say, is that oftentimes people go through the Becoming You process and they take their aptitudes and we have a tool that takes all of the things that when you have all done the Becoming You methodology, we take all of the inputs and we put it into a tool called the Career Catalyst, and it tells you 5 jobs you should have. And then people take those 5 jobs and they go to AI and they say, here are the 5 jobs I should have. This is my current job. Plot for me the path from today to then. So I love that application of AI. But I think we're sort of like early days of internet. We don't know. I guess I have a secret wish that the arrival of AI is going to actually make us more human and we're going to spend more time taking walks with each other and playing with our dogs and having conversations. But maybe I'm just hoping.
Yes, I'm certainly with you on that hope, and very much on the optimistic side of technology. Um, Now, if we could just make a jump from speaking about individuals and values,
Yes.
I know you spend a lot of time with organizations.
Yes.
Can we make that transition? What connects those two missions, the personal mission and organizational mission?
There's so many different applications. Uh, that I'm going to try to categorize them in my head. Um, one of the things that one of the outputs of the Becoming You process is that it creates for you a user's manual that sort of explains yourself to you. And we are beta testing this actually becoming an actual output, an actual book, a user's manual. And we hope to move that into organizations so that when you come and work in an organization, a manager can hand it to you and say, here's who I am to their employees. And that at a certain point, employees, if they feel comfortable, can have their own user's manual where they would hand it to their employer. And so we hope that Becoming You as a process allows people within organizations and especially remote organizations to understand each other better. That's a process that typically takes a year or two. And if you're remote, it can take longer. But if we're able to talk to each other around our values and aptitudes much more openly, it might facilitate and expedite understanding. But there's other uses of it, and the way and these uses came to us. So I want to say it's not like we drove the bus on this, but organizations also have values. And so, very early on, when the Values Bridge was first coming out, I was approached by multiple companies that said, okay, we want to make sure the people on our team have our values. We would like everybody to take the Values Bridge, and then we're going to talk about what our values are so we can have a conversation with them about the disconnect. And so I've done that in multiple organizations. And I think it's, while bracing, I mean, like, while sometimes very, while it often it's not an easy, these are not often easy conversations. These are conversations that can be very disquieting, but often very clarifying. And a lot of it is often not said. So when it is said, at least that's movement forward towards candor and honesty in the workplace. So there's sort of a way that this is being used. And then the other way that it's being, there's one other way that I've seen it used now multiple times, is that leaders are using the different tools to build out their teams in ways where they have more diversity around the table, diversity, especially around aptitudes around the table. And so I've definitely seen the tools used that way. And every single day, though, an organization calls me, like, for instance, look, we are very much, coaches are very much using the methodology. We're now certifying people in the methodology. We're about to start our second cohort of people being certified. And so coaches are using it, but also they're very much present are educators. And now we're seeing more and more people in financial services because they're bringing it to their clients as they help them plan their future financial or insurance needs, saying, wait, before we do this, let us figure out what your values are and what your interests are and where you want your life to be going. So the number of applications for this are surprising even to those of us at the lab.
Yeah, no, fascinating. To get again to revisit the theme of following the trends.
Yes.
You always had your finger on it. You mentioned that this is something that you also always watch. Do you think our society is becoming more open to reinvention or more afraid of it? Where are we now?
I think it's just everybody understands that it is the status quo is change. I mean, I think that the people who are the most afraid of it are the young people. Those people at my age or in their 30s, 40s understand that's the way it's going to have to be. I had a student, a mother and her son came to one of the 3-day immersives on campus that we do. And the son, as we were walking in one day, I bumped into them, and the son said, I said, what are you taking it for? I know why your mom's here. She's going to reinvent herself now, but what about you? And he said, I just want to find a job with security. And I stopped and I said, my dear child, you got to let that go. Reinvention, comfort with reinvention as is the way it's going to be. I always say to my students sometime, you have to remember that I wrote my high school, not my high school, I wrote my college thesis when I graduated by hand. Okay. So I've seen a lot of change, but everybody thinks this is the first time they're seeing change. We've all changed. And we just have to get very comfortable with it. And I know that nobody likes change really, but we have to come to terms with it. This is the way it's going to be.
Yeah, and I think the only hope for us is definitely reinvention, right? There's no going back.
Right.
I'm so glad that you brought that Gen Z topic. I want to revisit that very explosive op-ed that you wrote for the Wall Street Journal. Could you just give us a little bit of the context for those calling internationally who might not be following Wall Street Journal?
Yeah.
The main topic was and how you think about this.
Right. Well, because 80,000 people have taken the Values Bridge, we have so much data on values across generations. I mean, I have data across values across income, gender, industry. I mean, I could tell you what finance professionals under the age of 20, under the age of 30s values are. I mean, I have a lot of data. And but as soon as the data came in on what values were of Gen Z, I took a look at them. They were no surprise to me because I teach Gen Z. I'm with these young people every day. I knew what their values were going to be. And namely, the top 3 values of Gen Z are, the first one is what we call eudaimonia. That's self-care, pleasure, leisure, anything that feels good, flourishing. Their second value is authentic self-expression. We call that voice. They want to be totally authentic. And then their third value is we call it non-sibby. It's the desire to help others on an intimate level, a one-on-one helping, not changing the world helping. That's a very low value for Gen Z, but a very high value is helping others. And as soon as I saw those values, because my students are going into the workplace, I thought, and these weren't just my students. I mean, we have I mean, not a minute number were my students because I only have a couple of hundred students and we have 80,000 data points. This is just American Gen Zs and individuals. I thought, well, I wonder what hiring managers are looking for. And we went and we conducted a prolific survey of hiring managers over the age of 40 with at least 5 direct reports. And we, in the knowledge industries, people in business, we left out agriculture and so forth. And we asked them what were the values they were looking for. We defined all of the values and we asked them to choose the top value they were looking for. The number one value that they are looking for is achievement. That's the desire to win. The second value that they're looking for is what we call scope, which is the desire for learning, growth, and action, sort of travel, I think. Anything that they want people who want to be highly stimulated. And then the third value is work centrism, which is a value that reflects how much a role of work plays in your life. I, for instance, have extremely high work centrism. I'd work 8 days a week if I got a chance. When you do crunch those numbers across each other, it ends up that only 2% of Gen Z have the values that hiring managers are looking for. I have a long relationship with the Wall Street Journal. I've written for them many times. And I said, I have this data and this is what it shows. They said, would you please write that? I did. They put the headline on it, is Gen Z unemployable? I don't know if I would have put that headline on it myself because I like to live. And it was, it was quite a reaction. Gen Z was angry and they said, you're right. We don't want your values. You ruined the world. Why would we want your values? And hiring managers said thank you for putting a number to our daily nightmare. And then there was everything in between. Now I happen to have this data on a lot of other values. I'm working right now on the value of family in today's world. But this was a very explosive. It started a conversation. Every single time I turn on my phone or my computer, more people are talking about it, and I get it. Everybody has an opinion about it, and the data is quite stunning.
Yeah, fascinating. I have a question. I want to jump in with a question about this finding your values and purpose. It's actually from a colleague, Akihito Marita, who just arrived to New York for a coaching conference, and he's asking from the Japanese point of view, in a society where meeting social or parental expectations and fulfilling the expectations of the community rather than
Yes,
yourself has long been considered ideal, it is difficult for individuals to discover their own goals and choose a career path.
that's right.
How then can such individuals build and create their authentic selves?
This is such a incredibly important question, and one that my classroom at NYU is very international. And one of the things that frustrated me about other values tests is that it tested your values, but it didn't test how much you were actually living them. And so one thing about the Values Bridge is it gives you two numbers. It talks to you, it ranks your values from 1 to 16, but it also gives you a percentage of how much you're living it. And so it's not uncommon at all when I have students who are from cultures where the parents and society's values overrule your own, that I'll have a student come and he'll say, look, my value of voice is number one, and I have a 98% authenticity gap, a 98% gap between how much I'm living it. And so my answer is first is to understand what your values are and how much you're living them or not, because you may or may not share your culture's values. But if you find out that you've got a gigantic separation on every single value that your culture is imposing on you, for better or for worse, and you are like 100% or 98% separate from that, then you may need to go build your life in a different culture. I don't know any way around it. And it's sort of in many ways, this is when you often talk, my son-in-law is an immigrant and he talks about why he left his country of origin, which is because if he had lived his parents' lives, he would never become the person he knew he was meant to be. Sometimes though, just knowledge is power or knowledge is peace. And that you say, okay, I have this incredible value of say voice or agency, and I'm not able to fulfill it and still live where I live. At least I know why I feel this disquiet and I have to make some decisions about whether or not I'm going to accept it or I'm going to try to make changes to accommodate it. It gives you kind of transparency, but this is not uncommon with my first generation students who come in and say, you can talk all you want about choice, but my parents sent me to Stern to become a banker, and that's what I'm going to become. And I say, okay, I'll see you in 10 years, you know, and I bet I will.
Yeah,
Because in 10 years they'll be back and they'll be saying, okay, now I'm ready to be me.
fantastic. Along the same lines, Susie, the book is primarily geared toward career discovery. How can the principles of becoming you be applied to other areas of life? Relationships, personal growth, you already mentioned. But one question that came up from another colleague of mine, Brian Schrager, is about political differences. You know, Brian
Yeah.
is saying that he traveled across the country long before the kind of all of the differences became so explicit and
Mm.
transparent. Is there a way to use your insights in trying to bring people together, create some harmony around values?
Yeah, let me answer two questions at once. One is that I almost immediately realized when I started doing Becoming You that the off-label use of it was with couples. This was just a stunning realization to me. My students immediately said, I just did this exercise with my husband or my wife or my partner, and this is what we discovered. And we found out we have a very different level of this value, and we're building a bridge to talk about it. And so we actually, in the tool itself, if two people take it and they both opt in, it will show you your values next to each other and it will point out the harmonies and conflicts that you have. And so this is and so we are now using it openly with couples. We call it Becoming Us, and we use it all the time. We're building some curriculum around it. And so this leads me to whole issue around politics. It's going to be very interesting to see when we have the ability to do it, to cut the data to show the difference around values by political affiliation. And I think look, maybe I'm just hoping against hope. I think we may find out we're more similar than we are different. And that this is just a matter of there's some other stuff going on that actually I think in general there are some strong differences around value. So, for instance, the value of achievement, which is the desire to win and have success that others can see, is quite low. It's number 11 out of 16 for Gen Z. And obviously, or not obviously, but as you might guess, it's higher for people who are older. And one of the things that we've discovered is that 60% of Gen Z expresses that they would like even less achievement in their life. That's not true of older generations. And I think that it may be very interesting to find out if that actually is expressed across political lines. Is it what we're finding out is that conservatives value achievement more than liberals? Then let us just discuss at that point how that's a value and it's a choice, and it doesn't make somebody right or wrong. Achievement's not a virtue, it's a value. There are certain virtues that we all agree on. For instance, the virtue of kindness, the virtue of resilience, the virtue of courage, the virtue of fairness. Virtues are social constructs that we all agree on. Everything else is a choice. It's not right or wrong. And so at least have a conversation. The values are choices, and there's a continuum without a right or a wrong pole to it. It's so I don't know. Maybe it can enter the political discourse in a way that lowers the temperature. That would be the best. I don't
Right.
know if it will happen.
Here's another controversial, maybe, but definitely important question about the value of family in today's world.
Yeah.
And here's one of our participants saying that she's an older woman, found herself later in life without a family, but with a successful career.
Yes.
Same time as she's surrounded by, or a lot of us are surrounded by the conversation about that family comes first, especially now, this nativist language is reemerging really powerfully. What do you recommend? How do you recommend people to navigate uh, those environments where their values, again, might not be exactly in sync with what society prioritizes?
Well, I can tell you from my data, there's a very wide range of emotion and feeling and belief around family centrism. And so first we need to change the conversation that everybody feels one way. Family centrism is is a top five value for only 50%. So that means 50% have it in their moderate or peripheral values. So let's just let go of the fact that everybody feels one way and we feel a different way. Then there's the value of we call belovedness, which is the importance of a partnered relationship in your life. And it's very interesting that the sort of general conversation is women are dying for these relationships and men are not. But actually, the data would show you that men are 70% more likely to say they would like a partnered relationship than women. But again, I like just in general having a conversation around the continuum of values and understanding there's a continuum and these are choices. And so, like, let's just take work centrism. When somebody loves work or appears to like work all the time, they're called a workaholic. And that's a holic is a disease, isn't it? Alcoholic, you know? And I don't like that conversation at all. And I always stop people and say, we don't use that word. We say people have either high or low work centrism, and there's no better or worse. And I think that once we have a language where we can say family centrism, which is a reflection of your desire to have your organizing principle be family, that's on a continuum. And everybody's in a different place on that continuum, no better or worse. If you're not hurting anybody, your values are your own values to choose. So I think that the first step is for us to have a shared language that becomes depoliticized.
Oh, I love that. I love that, Susie. There are a lot of questions here around, again, what I mentioned before. How can people not only take advantage of your material on the website, but also participate in certifications and workshops that you might be conducting virtually because the people are calling from all over the world? So if you could give us a little bit of guidance before I
Yes.
go to the phone.
So about once a month, I do a 3-day immersive program at NYU, and people do come from around the world. I understand it's a very, it's not easy to do. It's hard for me to do it online because it's such a personal and intense experience that I have done it once online, and it was really hard. I couldn't see all the faces. A lot of emotional stuff happens. And so for now, there's the 3-day immersives about once a month. There's one next weekend, in fact. And so, and I think the next one will be in November. To become certified in the methodology, which I love because I would like nothing more than more people teaching this methodology than me. And so, this we're doing about every 6 months. It's a 6-month program. It starts with a week in person in New York, and then the rest of it is digital. Dustin and I have spoken many times about making that first week because it's too hard for some people to get away for a week to make that first week a digital experience. And I'm open to that because with coaches, it's a different thing. And it's not so much about self-discovery. It is about learning a methodology so other people can have self-discovery. And if there's enough interest, I'm happy to do that. And then I'm those are the main things that we do is the certification and the immersives. And I'm traveling. I mean, I love to travel. Now that my kids are all grown and I have the ability to travel, I'm going to Dubai and Abu Dhabi coming up for quite some time, and I just got back from London, so in LA.
Yeah, I'm hearing some of the feedback in the chat
Yes,
from the alumni who heard you in LA and other places where you speak.
that was so much fun.
We
Great.
are approaching the end of this session, and if you could leave us all with, the final guidance on how to navigate our own becoming. After everything you've done, I'm sure you've learned so much since the book came out and all the conversations and generous sharing with all of us of what you've learned. What would that be, kind of the guiding light for all of us on the journey in the
Okay. I think that one of the uh, unfortunate and hurtful uh, pieces of misinformation out there is that your purpose dawns on you. It's so rare that your purpose dawns on you. Usually, it's a long and iterative process, but that process doesn't need to be as long and iterative. And our lives are relatively short and precious. And so I think that there are ways to get to know ourselves better. And very unfortunately, the time that we have in life to get to know ourselves well is kind of wasted on us being when we're young. Like we're in school and we're young and we know nothing and we're just muddling through. And the sort of sweet spot for figuring out who we really are is when we have got some of the wisdom of our years. Like my favorite people to teach in becoming a methodology is sort of between the ages of 30 and 70 because they've got some wisdom of their years. And then that's the moment to go in and say, let's look at the data. And so I think it is a process. It's not as arduous as it sounds. I mean, look, I do it in 3 days with people with great success. I think these are very well spent hours and can change people's lives, including your own. And so I just end you again by saying I think it's better to be the author of your life than the editor. At one point, we're all the editor. I get that. But that moment you put the pen into your own hand is a glorious moment of liberation, and allows you to then share that joy with others. And that's the beautiful expanding circles of compassion and love that we all seek.
Thank you so much, Suzy. I think this is a perfect time for us to close. I think we've all learned a lot, and we're going to be sharing the recording of this webinar on our YouTube channel. You're all going to receive notifications. Please look at the upcoming events from us. In the next webinars in the series of Rethinking Work. But I am sure that our community will continue to grow, especially as we are also partnering with the Initiative for Purpose and Flourishing at the Stern School and with Suzy personally. And we are going to be looking forward to maybe revisiting this conversation at the next iteration of Your Becoming. Thank you all so much. Stay in touch and have a wonderful rest of your day today and a great week. Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.